I came up into the world of music playing punk rock. First, you learn how to play a power chord on a guitar, and then you play that power chord at 3 or 4 different positions, and boom, you've got a song. That was the model. So when I eventually found myself in front of a keyboard controller years later, I could make it work. I know what the notes are. I know how to build chords, but I'm not a pianist, and I've made peace with that fact. So when I first saw the Launchpad X, an 8x8 grid controller with pads and no names, no obvious orientation, no up or down, the first thought I had was how do you even use this thing? And it turns out that was exactly the right question. I want to be upfront about something. I'm a functional keyboard player. I can find my way around. I know enough about music theory to be dangerous, but dangerous is the ceiling. I'm never going to lay down a super convincing piano part. It's just not how my hands work, and it's not what I came from. And that's fine, except for one problem. When I'm writing in Logic and I want to capture a melodic idea, not program it, but capture it, I reach for a keyboard controller. And that's where things start to get dicey. Because the keyboard is fundamentally a linear instrument. Notes go from left to right, low to high. And with that layout is hundreds of years of expectation. I mean, there's a right way and a wrong way to interact with it, whether you know that or not. And when you're not familiar with the layout, when you don't have that muscle memory, you hesitate. You hunt for notes, and you lose the idea before your hands can even find it. I needed something where there were no wrong notes baked into the layout. Here's what's different between a keyboard controller and a grid controller. A keyboard controller maps notes horizontally, right? One direction, you always know where middle C is, so you always know where you're supposed to be. The layout has a grammar to it, but a grid doesn't. An 8x8 grid is 2-dimensional, and you can arrange the notes in any sort of pattern that makes physical and musical sense. And in scale mode, which I'll show you in just a moment, something interesting happens. All the wrong notes disappear. What you're left with is a field of notes where everything you touch is the correct note. It's in the key and scale that you set. The grid doesn't care if you're coming from the top left or the bottom right, or playing in a sequence, or just playing across the entire surface. It just responds. And here is where it gets interesting. On a keyboard, once your hand learns where a fifth or an octave is, it just goes there automatically. And that muscle memory is incredibly powerful, but it can also become a limitation. Whereas the Launchpad lets you change the layout of the notes entirely, which means the physical relationship between intervals can shift. The shapes don't have to be permanent. You can prevent yourself from playing the same patterns again and again, not by learning more theory, but by literally moving where the notes live. I found this melody by accident. I was exploring, not looking for anything specific. My hands just found a shape, a sequence that just felt and sounded right. That simple. On a keyboard, that never would have happened for me. At least not without the hunting around and playing wrong notes along the way. Let me show you how this actually fits into a session, not as a feature walkthrough, but as a real workflow. In the Launchpad's note settings, you can lock the grid to a specific key and scale. I'll use F minor here, but this works for anything. Once active, every lit up pad is a note in that scale. The pink pads are the root note at every octave, and the blue pads are the other notes in that key and scale. The pads that are not lit up are not part of the scale. When the Launchpad is set to chromatic mode, you can still play the notes that are not part of the scale, whereas in scale mode, the only notes available to play are the ones of that key and scale. And there are 5 different overlap views for how the notes are presented on the grid for either mode, chromatic or scale. Now in Logic, I have a track ready to record. Okay, so that took maybe 90 seconds. Normally, this would have taken me 10 minutes of hunting around on a keyboard, second guessing every note. From here, the workflow is exactly what you'd expect. Open the piano roll, clean up some of the notes, maybe quantize, rearrange, build around it. The grid is an on-ramp. It removes friction. You don't have to write an entire song using the Novation Launchpad, but you certainly can. But the grid, again, removes that friction. It allows you to get your idea down before it disappears. Using the Launchpad is an exercise in creative serendipity. Now, if you're a skilled keyboardist, Probably don't need it. I mean, your hands already know your instrument, and while the Launchpad may be interesting, it's not solving a problem that you have. Or if you're primarily a mix engineer and MIDI performance is not part of your process, you probably don't need it either. However, do keep in mind, beyond the scope of this video, but this controller can also control parameters and plugins and other things in Logic Pro, which is pretty interesting. But if you're producing, recording, writing tracks in Logic Pro, and that's primarily what you do, and when you sit in front of a keyboard controller, you start to feel kind of awkward, it just doesn't feel natural, then the Launchpad could very well be the controller of your dreams. The thing that surprised me about the Launchpad X wasn't its feature set. It wasn't the scale mode or the fact that you can rearrange the notes on the grid, though those are real. What surprised me was it just got out of my way. The keyboard, for someone like me, it carries pressure. Like there's a right way to play it, and I don't know that way fluently. But the grid doesn't have that. The grid doesn't have that history sitting on it, that same expectation of technique. It just responds to where your hands are. I've been creating and working on music for a long time now, and I still have those moments where I'm fighting with the instrument, just to get something out, get it out of my hands, out of my head. And the tools that stick around in my studio are the tools I don't have to fight with. So if you want to learn more about the Launchpad series from Novation, links down below. And if you saw my full-blown walkthrough of the Launchpad X, this is the other side of that video. It's not what it does, but what it's like to actually use it. Thanks for watching.